Hello and welcome to this damn fool idealistic crusade. Welcome everybody to my latest batch of Laserdisc pickups. Sorry it's been a little while since I've done an upload, but I've been messing around with my setup and figured I'd try to do things a little bit differently. And I always want to try and build up a nice stash of discs so I'm not just doing like, two or three at a time. So I've combined a couple, so this will be a relatively long upload, but let's get things started with a really nice title that is pretty rare and is one of those DTS discs that we all really want to find because they're crazy rare and go for pretty high dollar amounts. So this was a lucky eBay find. This is the DTS release of Carlitos Way. Of course, being a Universal title, they were the big studio behind DTS, so most of the DTS titles are all Universal releases. This uses the original poster artwork, and it looks really nice. This came out, I think, about 2 or 3 years after the standard pressing, which of course only has Dolby Surround audio. But I haven't seen the film in a while, and I thought this would be a really cool way to rewatch it with the DTS track. And the film did come out in the 5.1 era, so I do believe it had DTS on the original release in 93, 94, but it would have had 5.1 in any case, because even DTS films would have a Dolby Digital track on release prints if they printed them that way. The packaging is pretty much the same as the standard release from what I'm aware of. I don't have the actual standard Dolby Surround only disc, but pretty much all these Universal discs are just the same packaging with the little extra banner here saying, hey, if you don't have DTS, you're going to be flat out of luck. This does have the analog stereo tracks available, so you can listen to those if you desire, and you'll still be able to watch the film. Like I said, this was just a lucky eBay find. I just have a save search for any DTS titles. And most of the time, it's sellers who mistakenly put DTS on there, and you click on it, and of course, it's not DTS. But this one popped up. It was, less than $10 with shipping, so that was a no-brainer. But I'll be really excited to fire this up. The other thing, a lot of DTS titles, because they were made a couple years down the road in 97 or so, sometimes the transfers are the same, but a little bit improved because they're pressed better. And then some I've found the DTS versions, if it was a modern release, like say Tomorrow Never Dies, it's the same master. But on The Shadow, for example, they seem to have made a newer master because it's a bit cleaner and has a better color timing and is more stable overall than the standard disc. So I'll be interested to see what the transfer looks like on this. Next up is a title for my Gangsters shelf. This was pretty much the only out of the more modern Laserdisc releases with digital sound. But this is the one out of the classic Warner Gangsters films that I was really missing that wasn't, an early analog-only disc. Most of them got released as double features by MGM, and then White Heat was a standalone, and so was this one. So I finally picked up the regular standard release of Angels with Dirty Faces, which has this really lovely and very imposing mock-up of Cagney's face overlooking the kids with Jimmy at the bottom. So even though it's not the original poster art, I think it's a really effective cover. But it is, a Warner Brothers classic released by MGM UA due to the Turner Library merger, and all of these titles were handled by MGM when I was growing up, which was very confusing. So otherwise, it's the standard style sleeve from that era, very early 90s, basically holding over from the rear jacket style of the late 80s. But by this point, they were adding digital sound, so that's the big draw here. And I'm interested to check out this transfer and compare it to the DVD. Unfortunately, this has not come to Blu-ray yet, so I'm hoping the Warner Archive doesn't on Blu-ray at some point. This is probably, outside of Little Caesar and Public Enemy and the original Scarface and perhaps White Heat, this is the most famous of the classic Warner Brothers Gangsters films, and, has been ripped off a million times. And even if you've never seen this film, the whole idea of the two characters who start as children in the slums and go their different ways, one becomes a gangster, one becomes a priest, and then they interact in adulthood, that whole scenario has been ripped off or homaged so many times, you'll pretty much know what you're getting into when you start this film if you've never seen it before. So it's definitely a classic, and I'm surprised this and the other Gangsters films haven't come to Blu-ray yet. but I'm pretty sure it's probably Warner Archive just looking for better elements. The DVD is pretty good, but I'm interested to check out the Laserdisc version, and it does include the original trailer, which that not all of these, Laserdisc didn't always include trailers, but it was nice to have it when you could. But again, the real big draw here is probably going to be the PCM mono, but it's probably going to be a bit have a bit more wear and tear in the transfer than the DVD version. I'm just happy to finally have it. Next up is one title for the horror shelf. I picked this up because I've now got several of the titles in this series, and they're so well packaged that I've really wanted to get the other ones. So this is from, technically it's Orion. It was pressed and distributed by Image. So it's the first release in the double feature of Roger Corman, Vincent Price, AIP films. So this is the double feature of Fall of the House of Usher, backed with Pit and the Pendulum. So these are the first two films in the absolutely and justifiably famous Edgar Allan Poe cycle that Roger Corman made for American International in the 1960s. And like I said on some of my other videos, talking about the other editions I'd picked up, it's got the same gatefold design. This was the first time you could see these films in widescreen on home video, and these films were noted for their vivid use of color and their vivid use of widescreen. So seeing the pan and scanned is just a crime. And they put a lot of care and attention into doing these. They have these really nice liner notes, and because they all match, they go well together on the shelf. But to give you an idea, each film gets its own panel, and then all of these stills have funny little captions. These all pretty much came from, they were all collector stills, and I believe all of the liner notes were written by David Delval, who was a Vincent Price biographer. So I believe most of these stills were from his collection, and then he wrote these really great Criterion style essays, and all of them are really well done, and you can really see the attention to care and all the fine details that went into these, even though it's just the movies only, there's no extras or anything, but you get these nice packages, and the transfers themselves actually still hold up pretty well. MGM kind of did some new masters based off of these elements when they made their DVDs, and then some they just reuse these, so it's kind of a mixed bag. And in HD, there are older masters on the Shout Blu-rays or the Arrow UK Blu-rays if you get those. But these lasers still actually hold up pretty well, and they have nice PCM mono tracks. And sometimes it's nice to go back to the older versions. They have a little bit more wear and tear and warts and all and such, and they still hold up really well. So I'm very happy to finally have this one. And again, I never expected to get all of these, but since I got one and I found the packaging and the whole release just so well put together, I really wanted to pick this one up and check out the transfers and such. And these films are so great, you could never see them too many times or own too many copies. Next up are a few Criterion pickups that I managed to grab. Some of these are really uncommon, so I was very happy to find some of these. And then some are, like this one in particular is actually one I nearly bought before and then regretted I didn't because I've never seen another copy. So this is, let me make sure I get the spine number right. But this is spine number 12A. Yeah, 12A. So this is the Criterion reissue of the Max Ophuls picture Lola Montes, and they issued it before on a very early release with a completely different cover art design. But this is a couple years down the road. It adds digital sound, so it has a PCM mono track, and it goes for the revamped Criterion design, although it's not just the standard black cover. It's sort of got a marbling texture on here. I don't know how well it's going to come across. And then instead of having a black and white still, it's sort of blue tinted, so it sort of has a really nice effect. And then the script is in red, but it's actually got a font that's similar to what the film font would have looked like on the posters or something. So I really like this. It's a very classy jacket, and it still keeps with the old school Criterion black cover, red text, and a photo frame. But it has its own identity. And then the Criterion banner, it has the text in blue. There's no extras on here, but there is a really nice essay. And again, it's I don't have the older disc, but it is a very early Criterion release. So this adds the all important digital mono track and a full on essay and such. So you have a few extra stills down here. So I'll be very excited to finally spin this up and check out this Criterion transfer. But again, this is just one I saw in a store once, and I nearly bought it and I passed on it, and then I went back and it was gone, and I've regretted it ever since. So. Now, next up is spine number 32A. This is the classic adventure picture Scaramouche. And the regular spine number 32 does have a commentary, which this one does not have, but I may be mistaken. I'm pretty sure that version does not have digital audio. So I think this is one of the ones where you have to get the CLV version to get the digital mono track. I may be wrong. The CAV may have a digital track, but I know the CAV has a commentary that this version does not. In either case, neither version is very common. And then after this, MGM did their own version, which I don't know if it's the same transfer or not, and that's also uncommon. But yeah, I'm sure it's either the same element and maybe a little bit sharper, or it's just the same transfer but on the MGM label. But anyway, this is a really great classic adventure picture that doesn't get discussed often enough. Pretty much, Stuart Granger's kind of become a forgotten, adventure star. But all the pictures he was in the 1950s around this era are really, really good. I think this one's probably the best overall. Another film, for example, that he starred in that you might know would be the 1952 remake of The Prisoner of Zenda. This has the typical Criterion rear cover. It's nice that it's in red, so it looks a little bit fresher than the usual standard black or white rear cover. You do get a nice essay, and you get some nice stills because, of course, this doesn't have a gatefold because it's CLV. I don't know if these are the stills that were in the gatefold of the CAV version, which Criterion would do that sometimes. They would just recycle the pictures on the back so you could actually get some nice photos on the CLV version. So like I said, it doesn't have the commentary on here, but it is a nice version to own of this film, and it does have a digital track. Like I said, I can't remember for sure if the CAV version has a digital track or not, but it could be that I'm remembering it wrong, but I do believe this is one of the times where you have to have the CLV one to actually get a digital track. Next up was spine number 41. This is another one that was a reissue of a much older pressing. So this is the classic British film Tunes of Glory. With a really nice jacket. I like this sort of warm brown cover they have. It always makes me think of, it makes me think of basically like military style uniform because you see the brown uniform here. It just kind of makes me think of that, which fits the film perfectly. And I like the sort of gray color to the text and the Criterion banner. This replaces a much earlier edition that didn't have a digital track and did not have the usual style of Criterion art. So this reprints it with a digital mono track with the normal, at the time, Criterion art. So this is pretty much very much like the Lola Montes release I just discussed a minute ago. In terms of special features, it does have has an excerpt from a longer interview with the director, and it's an excerpt of I guess, a much longer interview, and it's in talking in specifically about Tunes of Glory and about working with Alec Guinness. So you do get that nice extra feature, but other than that, it's just the usual lovely Criterion essay, and being a nice CLV release from this time period, you get the little extra still on the bottom to help fill out the what would be normally blank space. And I like that they would do that on these. It's something very minor, but I really enjoy that they put images on the back covers after a little while. So they, of course, have released this film on DVD and now on Blu-ray as well. But if you'd like it on Laserdisc, this would be the edition to pick up unless you're a completist and would like the earlier version as well. Next up is spine number 83. This is Criterion's release of Miracle in Milan, which is directed by Vittorio De Sica, and has this really great cover art. I'll admit I haven't seen this film in a long while, so I will be rewatching it on this Laserdisc release. I love that the jacket design is much more modernized, uses the whole sleeve because this is a couple years down the road, and I like the Criterion banner in yellow. I think it's a really attractive looking jacket, actually. And then the rear It's also in yellow with red accents. You have the usual Criterion SA and digital mono, of course, but there's no special features. However, they do put in this specially colored box here talking about the transfer, saying that it was transferred from a fine grain source, which was the best they could find at the time, but there's one specific section on side 2 that may appear a bit softer due to the elements. So that's pretty cool that they actually not only made note of that, but they actually printed it on the jacket and actually printed it to where your eye will notice, so you wouldn't get worried if you were watching this back in the day and go like, why was a 3-minute stretch in side 2 all wonky? Like, but anyway, so I thought that was a really nice touch. And again, being a CLV release from the early 90s, you get this really nice still here to help fill out the rear cover blank space. So this is a really nice release and not very common. This usually goes for a bit more in terms of its dollar amount on the resale market. So I would recommend this. De Sica and Italian neorealism is not necessarily going to be for everyone, but I will be excited to finally rewatch this, so that should be fun. Next up is Spine number 152. This is the Criterion release of the classic silent film King of Kings, I guess I should say the original version. It was later remade under the same title, but this version, directed by Cecil B. DeMille, is a classic silent film in its own right, and it really still holds up. Again, I haven't seen it in some time, so I'm going to be able to give it a fresh rewatch on this Criterion release. But I really love the cover art. I love that they kept it in black and white. And again, by this time, they had transitioned over into using the whole cover. And we have the modern style Criterion banner across the top. But I love the composition of this shot. It looks beautiful on this Laserdisc jacket. I got this at a really good price, so I don't mind as much. Unfortunately, it's got a saw cut here in the bottom, which it doesn't detract from the cover all that much, but I wish that wasn't there because it's such a great cover. But anyway, I really like this jacket. It's one of those that I always saw, but until you get it in your hands, it suddenly looks a lot better. Now, in terms of extras, I don't think there are any on here. It was pretty much getting a brand new, cleaned up. I don't know if this was fully restored, but it was basically the best version you could get up to that point in time. And then this film has gotten a DVD release, but I can't remember which label did it. So it may have had some more cleanup work since then. It does have a digital track, so it does have a nice digital track for you to enjoy the score composed for the film, and it's just a single CLV disc, 2 sides, no extras, but it does have a nice essay that's a bit longer than usual, and you can see by the layout and the typeface that it is a more modern Criterion release is starting to shift over to the typeface and layout style of later releases such as Spartacus. So this is definitely a really nice release, and again, not very common, so it usually goes for quite a bit of money on eBay and other places. And the same can be said for this one, which is Spine number 163. This is the Criterion release of Jean Renoir's French Can-Can, which, again, absolutely gorgeous artwork with the modern Criterion layout and banner. Again, I got this at a really nice price, so it unfortunately has a hole punch in it, but it's not very bad, and seeing as this disc normally goes for significantly more than what I paid for it, I didn't mind as much. But again, with the typeface and the layout, you can see it's much more modern because this is a higher spine number, and Criterion had firmly established themselves by now. But in terms of extras, there really aren't any on here outside of this lovely essay. That's actually a Andrew Sarris essay. So you get this lovely essay by one of the most notable American film critics of all time. So it's nice having somebody more notable writing the Criterion essays from time to time. And again, it should be a nice transfer. I haven't got to spin this up yet, but Criterion did release this on DVD, but this Laserdisc version, of course, has a digital track. So I'll be excited to fire this up and check out this film again because it's been a long while for me. So Next up is the one Roan Group title that I picked up. And this is one I always wanted to get because I adore this film, but Roan Group titles are very rare. They're usually very pricey, and I only have a couple, and it's just ones that I've managed to pick up when they pop up. So this popped up, and I couldn't resist, even though there are now two Blu-ray versions available, which are very, very expensive for some reason. But anyway, I adore this film. I don't think it's well known enough, and I think it's an absolute gem. And this is the Roan release of The Most Dangerous Game, which was produced by the team on King Kong while they were making King Kong. So this film was shot on all the Skull Island sets, of course, based on the classic short story, and is easily, by far and large, the best version of The Most Dangerous Game, which has been adapted and ripped off a billion times under various names. So this is really the only one you should be concerned with. It is a pre-code film, so it is filled with tons of great grisly moments, and it's got tinges of a pre-code horror film. So basically, imagine a sort of cross between King Kong and Island of Lost Souls under the Most Dangerous Game premise, and you kind of have an idea of what this film feels like. And of course, the Roan release uses the gorgeous original poster artwork with the Roan Group banner, and then has a traditional Roan Group rear cover, and the cardstock's very nice, and the printing is very good, especially on the images here. They have very nice black levels on them, which doesn't always come through on a Laserdisc jacket. Of course, it has a digital mono track and was done from a cleaned up source that resulted in a much better transfer than anything that had been out at the time. This is basically, a Criterion level release, and Criterion themselves would do the film on DVD eventually, and that's also a good way to watch the film. But what I was really astounded by was, this release does have a good commentary. So this is Roan pretty much stepping up and doing Criterion levels of making fine Laserdisc. But what I was really stunned by was, and I had no idea this was in here, but they included an entire book of extended essays, and with beautiful stills, again, printed extremely well. And this is not just, what you would get in a Criterion release. This is literally a full-on essay piece that takes up a whole booklet. I mean, this is at least 15 or so pages. And in the middle of it, what's even more astonishing is they actually reproduced the entire original press book in its entirety. Of course, it's in black and white, which I don't know if it was originally in color or not, but this is basically a critical essay that would take up like a chapter in a book of sorts, but it has the original press book in the middle of it. So basically, I think somebody at Roan Group really was a giant fan of this film. So again, this release, if you ever find it, be sure and check that it has this booklet still in it, because this is fantastic. And again, I had no idea this was in here, so this was a really, really nice find, and I'm very happy that I finally picked this up. Again, I really love this film, and I think it's unfortunate that it's much overshadowed by its giant ape brother King Kong, because again, they made this film sort of in the interim while they were shooting Kong with the same team and some of the same cast as well. But it definitely pairs nice as a great triple bill with King Kong and Son of Kong, so you could watch them all back to back and recognize all the Skull Island sets. Now, next up, we move on to the director's shelf. So this is how I group some of my favorite directors and important directors, and I put all their works together. So going in alphabetical order, we start with a very rare release that I didn't even realize was on Laserdisc. This is a film I saw, I believe it was on TCM once, many, many years ago, but this is actually the first theatrical feature that John Frankenheimer directed, which is The Young Stranger. And this is of course, as you can tell by the cover, an image release with the lovely, faux Laserdisc impression on the jacket, and then a sort of tinted still from the film, but it does have a digital mono track. It is in 133, but of course this film would have been shown widescreen in the late 50s when it was released. But opened up like this, it shouldn't be too bad. And Warner Archive did do a MOD DVD, so you can get it on DVD if you want. And I always had meant to, had been in my wish list, but when I saw this pop up, and I saw it was in a picture of a lot of discs that a seller was selling, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not a Laserdisc, is it? But yeah, I'll be excited to finally see this again. It's been a number of years, and it's cool that Image did this with a digital track. But what's even better, and I didn't realize this again until I got it, there is an entire interview booklet reprinted in here with John Frankenheimer himself, and they talk about this film in particular, and then other films throughout his career. And as always, he's extremely frank. So. And it's a full-on nice interview, and there are not a whole lot with Frankenheimer. He did do a number of commentaries for his films and on Laserdisc and DVD, fortunately, before he passed. But this is a really nice touch, and I had no idea Image did anything like this, especially in their early days when they were doing our favorite, a janky mock-up cover. So this was a really cool find, and again, very, very rare. Next up, moving on to Hitchcock. This is a title that's not essential, but if you have the later releases, particularly the new Criterion Blu-ray. But I was always curious about the transfer, and it popped up locally for cheap, so I couldn't say no. So this is the Image release of the original version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, made in Britain in 1934. And I wish I'd had this growing up, because I was stuck with all the horrible public domain copies of various quality. So before the Criterion Blu-ray of the new restored version, here in the States, this is technically the best version of the film you could get, because there was no official DVD release, and they were all public domain crappy versions. So this was the best official version on Laserdisc, has a digital mono track, and I've only gotten to spot check this, but the quality is quite good. It's definitely on par with the Criterion releases of the Hitchcock British films. So again, I wish I'd had these Laserdiscs growing up, because I was stuck watching the awful public domain bootleg VHS tapes and public domain DVDs and such. And it does have this nice central image taken from the climax of the film, and it's printed very nicely. But of course, being Image, we have the fake Laserdisc cover. And then the rear is very much standard, very much sized for VHS dimensions. But again, this was the best release you could get pretty much until the new restored version. And it still holds up pretty well. It's a nice Laserdisc, and it's got digital audio and everything. So if you find it cheap, I can't recommend it highly enough, because it's a masterpiece. But the new restored Blu-ray is definitely the premier way to go. And this one as well, I picked up locally because it was cheap, and I can't say no, because I'll regret it ever since. So this one is really not essential due to it being a cheapy Universal disc, but this is the Universal release of Shadow of a Doubt with the Hitchcock profile cover that was used on all their Laserdisc and VHS releases and beta releases of Hitchcock films. So anyway, this is a 133 transfer. Of course, the film is an Academy, so that doesn't matter. But all the later Hitch films in this banner, this series, were all pan and scanned. But anyway, it is, even though it has this color still, it's in black and white, thank goodness. But it's the same transfer as the original VHS tape, which I've had. And so it's a tiny bit soft, but it looks much better on this than the VHS tape, obviously. Unfortunately, all of these are just analog only in sound. They don't carry digital audio tracks. They're also from about 1986 or so. So they're very early in terms of being, decent Laserdiscs. They're not a Universal Encore edition, but they're pretty much an Encore edition in every other way. Packaging and similar transfer and such. And being Universal, we have their lovely chapters. Side 1, none. And then at the very end, we get one chapter on side 2, which takes you to the theatrical trailer at the very end of the film. So basically, it has no chapters. But, remember, Universal cares. But anyway, This is not the recommended way to watch this film. You should at least watch it on DVD, if not the current Blu-ray, which is pretty good. But if you do get this version, the transfer itself is actually pretty good, if a bit soft, because it is, a much earlier disc. And the analog sound isn't too bad. Of course, like any analog track, it's got a little bit of noise and such. But yeah, it's definitely watchable. But I just wish Universal had done all their Hitchcock titles in spiffed up Laserdiscs a bit later on down the road. But these are getting harder to find. So when you find them for like $1 or $2, like I did on this one, I was like, well, at least for completion's sake, and I can check out the transfer. Now, next up is a really rare Laserdisc that is a film I've seen a couple times before. It's really a great film that practically nobody knows about. And as soon as I picked this up, Warner Archive announced and just brought out their new Blu-ray version that I'm really dying to check out. But I'm also excited to check out this Laserdisc transfer. And this is, of course, for the really, really great and interesting adventure picture directed by Fritz Lang, Moonfleet, which also, again, stars Stuart Granger. This is, I'd argue it may be, it's right up there with it may be the best Stuart Granger picture. It's up there with some of the others. I may even like it more than King Solomon's Mines, but it's a really fantastic adventure picture, and it's really odd to think that Fritz Lang made this, and it's beautifully composed in widescreen. It's got some really interesting and intricate color usage, and was made at MGM of all places. So, if you thought Fritz Lang couldn't make an adventure film, well, guess what? He did, and it's great, and it's called Moonfleet. So this is a MGM UA release, and again, I had no idea this had come out on Laserdisc, so I'm excited to check this transfer out. I had seen the DVD years ago because I got to rent it from Netflix, and then I've seen it on TCM before. But as soon as I picked this up, Warner Archive brought out a brand new restored version on Blu-ray. So that would be the definite way to go if you want to see the film in all its glory. But if you find this Laserdisc version, it's very uncommon. The LDDB value is actually quite high on it, so I was very happy to pick this up. And it does have a digital track, which I believe... it should be mono, but of course by this time in the early to mid 1950s, you started having films in scope that had stereo tracks. So it's always possible that this has a matrix stereo track. But again, I don't know if this film was mono only or had any stereo engagements. But I also like the cover, even though it's the usual MGM mock-up style. It does look pretty nice, but of course, poster art would always be better. But I'm excited to actually check this out, rewatch this, and look at the Laserdisc version, and then I'll have to pick up the Blu-ray as well. Now, next up is a very rare film. I've wanted to get this Laserdisc for a very long time, and I'm finally going to get to watch this film because I didn't want to watch some crappy version I found on YouTube or something. This is the only release of this film in the United States. There is a PAL Region 2 DVD currently, which I think is based on the same master, and that's it. So I'm really excited to see this film. It's very hard to find, and again, this is the best way to watch it. So this is the RKO Classic Collection release of the film Mademoiselle Fifi, based on stories by Guy de Maupassant, directed by Robert Wise, produced by Val Lewton. This was made in 1944 in the middle of the classic series of Lewton B horror films. This was an attempt to make a prestige, important costume drama picture, and of course, RKO nickeled and dimed them, so they made this costume picture basically for their usual threadbare B-movie budget. And I've been dying to see this for a long time. Uses a lot of the same cast and crew from some of the other classic Lewton horror films, and is very, very unknown, just like the other non-horror Lewton films. And I've wanted to see this for years and years and years, but again, I wanted to see a decent version. It does have digital mono track like the other RKO Classic discs, and it's got the similar style of artwork and packaging with some nice stills, and I'm just excited to finally see this, so I can't say too much about this other than it's based on several stories by de Maupassant again, and it was also inspired by, being made in the middle of World War II, so there are, veiled attempts to, build the people's morale, even though this is obviously not set in World War II. It's still set in a conflict of sorts, like many other Hollywood films would do at the time. They would be talking about World War II without directly talking about World War II. So anyway, I'm very excited to finally see this. And like I said before, this is the only release of this film in the United States. It's never been reissued. And there is a PAL DVD out there, and that's pretty much it. So if you see this, definitely check it out, especially if you're as giant of a Luton nerd as I am. Next up is another title. There is no available release currently. And this film is, I've only got to see it once before, and it's an absolute masterpiece. It's criminally unknown. But anyway, this is the Nicholas Ray picture, The Lusty Men, also an RKO Classic Collection release, featuring absolutely brilliant performances by the lead trio of Susan Hayward, Arthur Kennedy, and especially Robert Mitchum, who gives one of the best performances of his entire career. I mean, this film is staggering. If you've ever seen a Nicholas Ray picture, you know that he was able to get performances and give all the characters such an emotional depth that by the end of it, you feel like a sponge that's been wrung out. And this film is no exception. The title is a bit misleading. It's, set around the rodeo circuit, and Mitchum's character is basically a old rodeo hand whose life is essentially completely busted out, and he's sort of drifting listlessly. In a lot of ways, it's sort of a precursor to films like Junior Bonner, but it's an absolutely incredible piece of work with absolutely gorgeous, very noir-esque black and white photography that really makes the emptiness of the characters hit home. In a lot of ways, I think this film is best described in a very simple way. If you had to describe this, I would say it's like if you cross the Misfits with Junior Bonner. That's what this film feels like. So it's not a happy picture, not at all, but very realistic, very very emotionally deep. It packs a real wallop. And it was restored by the Film Foundation, and then Warner Archive released it on DVD on an MOD disc, but then that went out of print. So there are rumors that Criterion may do this, but nothing's come to fruition yet. So currently, the best way to see this film, outside of the once in a blue moon when it comes on TCM at 2 o'clock in the morning, is this Laserdisc version, which you can get for about 10 or $15, and I finally found it at a nice price. And the Warner Archive DVD goes for crazy money, so this is a much more financially viable way of seeing the film, and it has a digital mono track, but I cannot recommend this film highly enough. It's one of Nick Ray's masterpieces. It's a fantastic picture that will literally, run you over like a steamroller if you've never seen it before, and it's a must for Mitchum fans like myself. Next up is the Polanski classic, The Fearless Vampire Killers, or, pardon me, but your teeth are in my neck. This is the very important MGM release. It was the first time you get the film letterboxed on home video, and the first time you could see the entire original European cut. This film was heavily cut down and really messed up by the U.S. Release prints by MGM, where they added a cartoon opening and they removed significant portions of the film and really changed the tonality of it. So originally it got, didn't get a very good release, didn't get very good reviews, didn't do too well here in the States, but in Europe it fared a lot better. This film is really bizarre. It's a one-of-a-kind picture that's basically one of the best horror comedies ever made. It's very European in its outlook, and it basically, I think, bridges the gap between films like Repulsion and Rosemary's Baby, because if you know Rosemary's Baby, there's a very particular sort of dark humor that's in it that pops up all throughout. There's just this it's very strange undercurrent of black humor in the middle of this horror film, and this picture really takes that to extremes. So it's got great set pieces, great horror set pieces, beautiful, stunning widescreen photography, and the color and the way they achieve the darkness, particularly in the castle sets, is really stunning. But it's also got gut-bustingly funny pieces. So it's a picture that can spook you on one hand and then immediately turn around and make you pee yourself laughing. So it's a very strange picture. It's definitely very European, probably not for everybody. But again, this release is important for presenting it in its original form for the first time. And it has this really nice gatefold. Of course, this has a digital mono track, and it does have some nice extras, including a little featurette about Sharon Tate that was made at the time, which I don't think is carried over onto later releases. The DVD is also the original uncut version and is a good way to see this, as this Laserdisc can be a bit hard to find and pricey. And then as soon as I got this, Warner Archive brought out their brand new scan on Blu-ray, so you can get the beautiful new Warner Archive Blu-ray of Fearless Vampire Killers. So just like Moonfleet, as soon as I get this rare Laserdisc, they bring out a Blu-ray, so I'll have to pick that up. I haven't got to watch through this yet, but I've always heard it has a nice transfer, so I'll be excited to revisit this on Laserdisc, and then like Moonfleet, I'll have to get the Warner Archive Blu-ray and revisit it that way. Because of course you need 3 copies of the same film. Why not? Next up is the George Stevens classic, Alice Adams. This is, of course, an image disc, and of course based on the Boo Tarkington story, and really one of, if not the film that solidified Katharine Hepburn as a real star. First it was Morning Glory, then it was Little Women, but then this film, Alice Adams in 1935, is really what solidified her as a movie star, really. And also really helped to establish George Stevens as a major director as well, because this was a critical and financial success. Of course, Warner Brothers has the film out on DVD, and it's a pretty good DVD. So I was just curious to see what this transfer would look like. It's very uncommon to find titles like this, especially early 30s films that got image releases that probably didn't get a lot of copies printed, but it does have a digital mono track, and I'll be curious to compare this to the DVD and see how it holds up. Probably be a little bit softer, maybe a little bit brighter, but sometimes you can be really surprised. Sometimes it's almost exactly the same transfers, or it's the same element, and the audio can be better than the DVD. But anytime I can find one of these rare, especially early 30s and harder to find 40s titles on Laserdisc for cheap, I'm all over it. All right, so that's going to do it for the director's shelf. Now we're just going to move on to the last bunch of titles that I've all got grouped by chronological release year. That's how I do most of my main shelves, if you've seen my other videos. So to start with, jump all the way back to 1933. This is the MGM release of 42nd Street. This was reissued like this in this cover packaging, along with the Busby Berkeley disc, which just was a compilation of the various musical numbers, and then Gold Diggers of 1933. Now, Gold Diggers has a digital track, where unfortunately this one does not. It came out just before, I guess, they decreed all MGM discs would have a digital track. But since it was cheap, and these are rather uncommon, and I have the Gold Diggers disc, I figured get this to check it out and have the two of them together. So you can see it has the late 80s style of rear cover they used on a lot of these classic releases, so it's pretty much in keeping with the way those were treated. It does have all the musical numbers are specified in the titles and are italicized, which is nice if you're looking for just to, find the hot spots that you're looking for in reference to Berkeley's work. So that's a nice touch, but otherwise it's just the movie only, and of course would be a lot better in picture than the VHS tape, but of course it's analog only in sound. Next up is another film from 1933 that I've never seen, but just from the cast alone, and of course being from a Ben Heck screenplay and a David O. Selznick production, I figured finally have to see this. So this is Topaz, starring John Barrymore. And again, this was a Selznick picture written by Ben Hecht, so it's a Fox release with a digital mono track, so it's got a pretty nice cover that's a bit different than the usual Fox classic releases from this time, but we have the usual standard black Fox bar across the bottom with, Laserdisc extended play. So on this rear cover, it's pretty much the standard Fox design, but I do like the blue background. It makes it look a lot nicer, particularly for a black and white film. I don't know, something about it just really appeals to me. And then you get these really nice liner notes. So it'll be exciting to check this thing out. I've heard of this film before, read about it, but never got the chance to see it actually. And, Fox was pretty nice about getting into having digital mono on all their releases pretty early on, a lot before some of the other studios. So I really do like this cover. So it looks a bit fancier than their usual release. So it'll be fun to finally see this. Next up from 1934 is another release in the RKO Classic Collection. This is The Little Minister. This is another early Katharine Hepburn picture that I've heard about but never gotten to see, so it'll be fun to see it on this Laserdisc release. And some of her early films are really only easily available on these RKO Classic discs, so not everything has made it over to DVD, or if it has, it's usually locked behind being an MOD disc, which can get very pricey just to track down various releases that you'd like to see that you've never gotten around to. So it should be fun to check this out. It's pretty much the same standard RKO release in terms of packaging and everything, and they all have digital mono tracks, so it should be fun to watch it this way. This one was a nice find. This is the image pressing release of the Columbia Classic Golden Boy from 1939. Really the picture that launched William Holden as a big star actor. And it, again, being from 1939, is another great picture from Hollywood's golden year. And this is the only Laserdisc release that it got. So it should be a pretty nice watch. And again, probably going to be a bit... have a bit more wear and tear than the eventual DVD release did. So comparing this to the DVD, this will probably be from a much more worn print source, but it does have a digital mono track. And despite being an earlier image style release, complete with old school image jacket, I do like the artwork and the stills chosen, and it's pretty nice and a very uncommon disc apparently. The database values for this are a bit higher than typical discs, so it'll be nice to watch it this way, and just nice to pop up in the local bins. This was another local find that I was just very excited to come across now that I'm finally trying to get around and see all of the various classic serials from various studios. So this is another classic Republic serial. This is the 1939 serial Undersea Kingdom from the Republic Video line of serial releases where they tried to make new digital masters and clean them up some. So they're complete with digital mono tracks, and they have these nice cover artworks with an original poster image here on the front. And then the rear gives you some nice stills, and then the breakdown for chapters of the various actual serial chapters, so chapters for your chapters. But anyway, all these are quite nice, and most of these have never gotten another go-round and getting a new master made. So if they made it to DVD, it's usually these Laserdisc versions. So and of course these LDs have PCM tracks compared to lossy Dolby Digital on DVDs. But yeah, it's really nice to see that they were putting care even into classic serial presentations. So I've never seen this one before, but I'll watch any serial that looks pretty good. So sometimes you can be very pleasantly surprised by these, simply for the work that went into them, even if the story is not perhaps the greatest. Next up from 1945, this was a very surprising release to find locally. This is the image release of Edgar G. Ulmer's 1945 masterpiece, Detour. This is just one of the great film noirs, and for the longest time, because it was made for such a low budget, that meant that it was not made at a major studio, so its availability was very, very sketchy. Usually you'd have to see this on bad public domain copies. Image finally made a DVD, I think VCI did as well, and now the new 4K restoration is out on Criterion Blu-ray. But I'd never thought about it on Laserdisc until a couple years ago, and then I realized that Image did this one Laserdisc. So again, back in the day, I wish I'd had this because it was probably the best version around prior to the Image DVD, which I think was like 2003. I know the first version I saw was like a very bad public domain VHS tape, which, this film being made on a low budget, it doesn't help seeing it on a very bad copy. But this has really nice artwork. I love the yellow text on black, so it's very striking, even though it's on a standard Image jacket. And again, this is a very rare, uncommon disc. It's typically much more, it's going to cost you a lot more than the usual, $5 amount or less for Laserdisc. So it was very surprising to see this along with some of these others locally, and I just snatched it up immediately. It does have a digital mono track, but of course, it's not going to be as beautiful as the new 4K restored version, which you can again get on the Criterion Blu-ray. But if you ever stumble across this on Laserdisc, I definitely would recommend picking it up because it's a very rare title. And if you've never seen this film, it's an absolute must, even though it is, it was made on a minuscule budget for a Poverty Row studio and only a handful of days. But it's really the one film that Edgar G. Ulmer made that has clout to it after his days working for studios, because he pretty much got blackballed for several reasons after a few short years. But it's really one of the great iconic noirs, despite its severely compromising ultra low budget. Next up from 1948 is the classic Max Ophuls picture, Letter from an Unknown Woman. This is the Republic release. Did get a Criterion release, and I didn't even know about this Republic version, so I just found this locally, and I grabbed it, and it wasn't until I got home that I found it's apparently a very rare version, because the database doesn't even have a picture of this cover. I'm sure it's probably the same transfer as the Criterion. They both apparently came out in 1992. But it is a pretty nice looking release. It has digital mono and is apparently from a then cleaned up version. So it should be comparable to the Criterion, I would think. I don't know if the Criterion has any extras. I'm sure it might. But this is a pretty nice release, and it's probably the best at the time for this film up to that date. And all the Ophuls pictures are inescapable and completely important. So if you've never seen them, they're absolute must. But I'll be excited to check this version out, because I didn't even know it existed. Next up, also from 1948, also a restored version on Republic Video. This is the classic Noir Pitfall. This is sourced from a UCLA restoration and has this nice cover art to it. I haven't seen this noir in actually a good while, so it'll be nice to check it out again on this Laserdisc transfer. There are, of course, DVD versions, and I don't know for sure if this has come to Blu-ray or not. A lot of noirs haven't, but this is definitely a good way to check it out, since it does have a digital mono track. It doesn't credit it on the sleeve, but it does on the disc, so it is actually there. And it is from the then current UCLA restoration. But anytime I get to revisit one of the classic noirs, I'm happy. But it'll be really nice to check out this Laserdisc version. Next up is another classic film that's always nice to revisit every once in a while. This is the Columbia Pictures Award winner repressing of All the King's Men. This is actually the slightly later version with the different cover. This came out first under the Columbia Classics banner. So this has a nice glossy finish to it, and it's got the same cover art, but it has the more modernized award banner on the top. So I think this was made about a year or two later. So the pressing quality might be a little bit improved. So I was always holding out to see if I could find this version over the other one. It may even be the same disc inside, I don't know. But I always try to find the slightly newer versions of Columbia discs. But of course, being Columbia, that means it's a DADC press title, which means you could always be playing the Rot Lottery. So I'll have to check this out. I don't think most of the Columbia Classics discs like this, they don't really have Rot issues, even though they are DADC discs. And DADC also did a number of Criterion titles. But of course, with that plant, you never know if that particular disc could have Rot issues. Anyway, the film is just a single CLV disc. It does have a digital mono track, but this was like the first time it was cleaned up and, represented to the public. Of course, it is an important award winner from 1949. It's really timeless in a way, because it's about issues that still plague us to this day. So if you've never seen it, I do highly recommend it. But this is the best version to own on Laserdisc. It has been cleaned up for DVD and did come out on Blu-ray as well in a really nice HD restoration. But if you'd like the Laserdisc, try to search out for this one. Next up from 1960 is the classic picture Elmer Gantry. This is the MGM-UA pressing with a digital audio track. Unfortunately, this is one of their discs where they presented it in a 1:3:3 ratio. So it's not a scope film, so it's pretty much just opened up, loses a little bit on the sides. I just wish it was letterbox, because otherwise it's a great transfer, and it has PCM mono. This, of course, is the film that Burt Lancaster won his Oscar for, and deservedly so. It's a just absolutely blistering performance, but it's a very recommended film if you've never seen it. It's probably one of Richard Brooks's best directed pictures, and you get this nice gatefold. It does include the original trailer at the end, but that's it for special features. Of course, you get the gatefold because it's 2 discs, as the film is, a bit over 2 hours. And then the rear is the standard style MGM style of the time. It does have some nice stills, and I do like the images used for the gatefold. So, it pretty much fits in line with MGM releases of the time. I just wish they had actually released a letterbox transfer. That's the only real downside to this disc. It is out there on DVD actually in widescreen, so you can watch it properly. But this is still a fine way to watch it if you have a good LD setup. So next up is a picture directed by John Sturges from 1961. This is By Love Possessed, released by MGM UA. And this is another film I've never gotten to see. So I've been slowly trying to check off the checklist of filmographies for various directors. John Sturges is among them. So this is a blind buy for me. And I've heard the title, and of course, the cast and premise alone sound interesting enough, I suppose. So this will be a first-time watch for me. It is typical packaging from MGM during this time, and it does have a digital mono track, so it should be a good presentation. I don't know. I don't think this is in widescreen. I don't think it's letterboxed. It does include the original trailer, though. So, again, it should be a nice presentation, and again, it'll be nice to actually see this. All right, jumping up quite a bit in years, we jump up to 1982. This is the Paramount remastered letterbox release of An Officer and a Gentleman. And so it's actually finally in widescreen on home video for the first time with the original, I believe it should be Dolby Stereo, so it should have a matrixed PCM track on here. But yeah, and you notice it has the Paramount remastered widescreen edition sticker still on here, which is pretty cool when you still have the shrink on these, because that was used by them to really hawk these as finally being in their correct aspect ratio for the first time. And you get a bigger rendering of the original poster art, but of course, because it's Paramount, unfortunately no gatefold. But you do get a pretty nice rear cover, and Paramount was pretty good at this time about making the text really big, so it's very easily readable. And no real special features, but you do get your chapter breakdown here. And again, it was a nicer presentation of this film, so at least it was finally in widescreen with PCM audio. So this is definitely the version to look for if you want the film on Laserdisc, and was probably the version recycled for the DVD release. Now, this next film is the same thing. It's a widescreen reissue with digital sound in the 90s. This was actually the film that Taylor Hackford made after Officer and a Gentleman. And if you guys know me very well, I have a bit of a problem with this, but it was cheap and in the shrink wrap, so I couldn't say no. So, of course, I picked up the Sony reissue letterbox release of Against All Odds. And the reason why I have a problem with this film is they dared to remake Out of the Past, which is one of the greatest films ever made. I can live with this though, because it basically follows in the wake of Body Heat, which is basically a reimagining of Double Indemnity instead of being a straight out remake. So you had films like this starting to come out in the 80s, and then of course other things like the remake of DOA, and then other adult thrillers that sort of followed in this vein of these not quite noir remakes, but very much inspired by classic film noir. So I also think this film also weaves in a few elements from the 1975 classic Night Moves, directed by Arthur Penn. So for this one, I can live with it, but it's not a film I return to very often. I know a lot of people really like it. I know Culture Dog is a big fan of this, and I always get into the comments about me being such a diehard Out of the Past fan. But yeah, it's definitely pretty good. It's got some nice elements in it, but I just hate it when people go on and on about this film and don't even realize it's a remake, and they're going on about the stuff from Out of the Past. I'm interested to check out this transfer. It's not a super common disc to find in the widescreen version. Usually you find the older pan and scan transfer. So, yeah, I'll be interested to check this out. And of course, you get some nice Sony style liner notes here. Of course, it is a DADC disc. So, of course, that always means you roll the dice and play the laser rot lottery. But there's not really a rot report on this. So, it should be pretty good. And it has the original Dolby Stereo track in PCM, which, of course, features the iconic Phil Collins Oscar winning song, Take a Look at Me Now. So, yeah, I mean, the atmosphere in this is good, but it's not a candle to the atmosphere of the original film. So, yeah, I'll be excited to, revisit this, and it does have the nice poster art across the jacket cover. So, for 75 cents, I was like, okay, I'm in. I'll give this another go. But, yeah, I've just never been able to really enjoy this because the whole time I'm just like, I'm just gritting my teeth because I'm like, oh my God, why did somebody make this? But they do pay homage by having Jane Greer in a smaller role in this, so I at least give them that. They at least honored the original film that much. Next up, for 1989, this is just a release I wanted to pick up to check out the transfer. This is Paramount's release of Harlem Nights. And what's nice about this is it has a sort of silvery cover. It's got a nice matte finish on it, but it has a sort of silveriness to it. It's not just a white background. And it has the really nice and stylish original poster art there. It has a Dolby Stereo Matrix PCM soundtrack. But otherwise, it's just a standard Paramount widescreen release from the time. So, the Video Master is going to, definitely look a bit dated, but it's still a solid release of this film, which I haven't seen in a long, long time. So this was a nice find, and I'll check this out again and check out the laser transfer. Next up, from 1991, again, a Paramount release. This is the letterbox release of Flight of the Intruder, and this is one of the last major studio features that John Milius directed. Didn't get very good reviews at the time, but I've always been interested to see it, and especially since I did my Milius live stream. So I'm gonna spin this up pretty soon, and I'm interested to check this out. Has the original poster art here and the typical Paramount banner, has a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, and a typical Paramount rear cover for the time period. So there is a DVD of this, but I don't think it's out there on Blu-ray. So this is still a viable way to watch the film because the DVD is pretty old anyway and could be just a port of this Laserdisc. So yeah, I think Milius does do some really interesting work, and I'll be excited to check this film out and see what it's like and see if it's any better than the not-so-good reviews it got back in the day. From 1995, this is the THX mastered letterbox release of Congo. I finally found this at a nice cheap price and good shape in the letterbox copy. I've gotten a copy before, but unfortunately it was the pan and scan version. So if you ever pick this up, make sure it has the widescreen letterbox bar across the top, which, because it kind of blends into the black background, it's very easy to accidentally get the pan and scan version. But, I've always heard this is a nice, mid-90s reference disc with good picture and a really great soundtrack and a nice AC3 mix. So figured I'd pick this up and give it a shot. I'm a sucker for any 90s action film on Laserdisc, especially with a good soundtrack. So sometimes you can find discs like this that are cheap and they become nice new benchmark discs for the format, or show-off discs or test discs. So I don't know if this disc will be quite up there, but I pretty much use Goldeneye for everything because it's like the Laserdisc benchmark. But it looks like a nice release, and I know this film didn't get good reviews back in the day. It got some good reviews, but I remember seeing it as a kid and thinking there was some nice old-fashioned goofiness in it. So it'll be nice to fire this up again, rewatch it for the first time in a long time, and check out this AC3 track, and now to actually have a widescreen copy and not a pan and scan version. Now, this next one was, again, a local find, and I picked it up even though I know there's a nice Blu-ray version, simply because it's a late release, and anytime I find films 97 and onward, it's an instant buy if it's not expensive, simply because I'm curious to see what the transfer looks like, check the soundtrack and stuff, because late releases can be really, really amazing. So, unfortunately, this is one that doesn't have AC3. It's where the studio cheaped out and just gave us a ProLogic PCM track. But anyway, it's a nice-looking release. It's the Fox letterbox release of The Ice Storm, the 1997 Ang Lee picture. here. And I do like the cover art. It's quite nice. And you do get the late 90s Fox widescreen banner here on the top. And I guess to indicate that it's a drama, and it's called the Ice Storm, they colored the searchlights blue, sort of an ice blue instead of the usual yellow. And then the rear cover is standard Fox for the time, with some nice liner notes and the credits at the bottom. No special features, unfortunately, and like I said before, there's no AC3 here, but since this is more of a drama anyway, it's not going to have like a lot of, crazy surround imaging that you would get in an action picture, so it shouldn't be as big of a loss. I am excited to check this transfer out and see what it looks like. Again, any late release I can get my hands on, I'll give it a go, even if it's a, just a plain drama or something more sober like this. But anyway, a nice find, and it's apparently not very expensive, so it's one of these late releases you can get like this particular copy for a $1 or $2 if you're really interested. And then last for this upload is another one of these late releases that I just picked up simply because it's a late release. So anyway, this is I'm not sure how you pronounce this, but this is the MGM letterbox release of Yuli's Gold, a very nice late release of a late 90s, award-nominated drama from the time period. I've seen this, in video stores before, but I've never actually watched it. And of course, Peter Fonda was pretty much underrated in most pictures he was in, and so I'm interested to see this for his performance alone, and the fact that it's a late release, so that was pretty much a no-brainer purchase. This disc was actually pressed in '98, so it is a full-on late release, and like the Ice Storm, you can get it for like $1 or $2. And also like the Ice Storm, they cheaped out, and there is no AC3 track on here. It's just a Dolby Pro Logic encoded PCM track. But again, since this is, a more somber drama, it should be just fine because, you're not going to get a lot of crazy surrounds going on. It does include the original trailer, and it is a really nice MGM disc from the time. And being such a late release, if you look here, it is actually a image title. Because by this point, Orion, MGM, Warner Brothers, everybody had handed over their Laserdisc production over to Image. And that's another sign that you've got a late release that, it's got an Image stamp on the back, or that they actually handled everything themselves. Other than that, it's got the standard MGM late-era Laserdisc layout in terms of the cover. It's got some nice text with some of the original critical blurbs and such, but I'll be interested to check out the transfer on this. So anytime I can find a late release, I'm definitely game to check out the transfer and, hopefully enjoy the film. Hopefully the film's pretty good. But when you can get a late release for only $1 or $2, that's not bad. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this particular edition of Laserdisc Pickups. And as always, I want to thank everybody for hanging out with me, letting me go through some of these lovely big 12-inch platters that we all love so much. And hopefully you learned something, maybe found some titles you'd like to check out, some titles you'd like to pick up. And since some of these are much more on the rarer side of the usual finds and common discs, hopefully you can actually find some of them without having to resort to having to pay very heavy internet fees trying to find some of the rarer copies. But they're out there, and like I always say, you never know what's going to turn up in a local bin. So most of these did turn up locally, so they were some really nice finds, especially since it's been pretty dry recently in the past like 5 or 6 months in terms of what's turning up in the local stores. So anyway, thanks again to everybody for watching, and hopefully I can get another Laserdisc video together pretty soon. But like I said at the start, I try to wait until I have a good amount of discs to go through, so it's not just me going through 2 or 3 discs at a time. And as always, thanks to everybody for watching, and hopefully you can find some good Laserdisc finds for yourself out there pretty soon.